Chapter 45. I arrived at Chicago on the 29th of October, 1851, and spent 6 days with Bishop Vandevelt in maturing the plans of our Catholic colonization. He gave me the wisest advice with the most extensive powers which a bishop can give a priest, and urged me to begin at once by selecting the most suitable spot for such an important and vast prospect. My heart was filled with uncontrollable emotions when the hour came to leave my superior and go to the conquest of the magnificent state of Illinois for the benefit of my church. I fell at his knees to ask his benediction, and requested him never to forget me in his prayers. He was not less affected than I was, and pressing me to his bosom, bathed my face with his tears and blessed me. It took me 3 days to cross the prairies from Chicago to Barbonius. Those prairies were then a vast solitude, with almost impassable roads. At the invitation of their priest, Mr. Cordialt, several people had come a long distance to receive and overwhelm me with the public expressions of their joy and respect. After a few days of rest in the midst of their interesting young colony, I explained to Mr. Cordialt that having been sent by the bishop to found a settlement for Roman Catholic immigrants on a sufficiently grand scale to rule the government of Illinois, it was my duty to go further south to find the most suitable place for the first village. But to my unspeakable regret, the very moment I told him the object of my coming to Illinois, I felt the spirit of jealousy turn him into an implacable enemy. It had been just the same thing with Reverend Mr. LaBelle at Chicago. So long as they believed that I had left Canada to help them increase their small congregation by inducting the immigrants to settle among them, they loaded me both in public and private with marks of their esteem. But the moment they saw I was going to found in the very heart of Illinois settlements on such a large scale, they banded together to paralyze and ruin my efforts. Had I suspected such opposition from the very men on whose moral help I had relied for the success of my colonizing schemes, I would never have left Canada for Illinois. But it was now too late to stop my onward march. Trusting in God alone for success, I persuaded 6 of the most respectable citizens of Bourbonius to accompany me in 3 wagons in search of the best site for the center of my future colony. I had a compass to guide me through those vast prairies, spread before me like a boundless ocean. I wanted to select the highest point in Illinois for my first town, in order to secure the purest air and water for my new immigrants. I was fortunate enough, under the guidance of God, to succeed better than I expected, for the government surveyors have lately acknowledged that the village of St. Anne occupies the very highest point of that splendid state. To my great surprise, 10 days after I had selected that spot, 50 families from Canada had planted their tents around mine, on that beautiful site which forms today the town of St. Anne. We were at the end of November, and though the weather was still mild, I felt I had not an hour to lose in order to secure shelters for every one of those families, before winter could spread sickness and death amongst them. The greater part were illiterate, and poor without any idea of the dangers and incredible difficulties of establishing a new settlement. They were at first only 2 small houses, one 25 by 30, and the other 16 by 20, to lodge us. With the rest of my dear immigrants wrapped in buffalo robes, with my overcoat for my pillow, I slept soundly, many nights on the bare floor, during the 3 months which it took to get my first house erected. Having taken the census of my people on the 1st of December, I found 200 souls, 100 of whom were adults. I said to them, "There are not 3 of you, if left alone, able to prepare a shelter for your families this winter. But if, forgetting yourselves, you work for each other as true friends and brethren, you will increase your strength tenfold in a few weeks. And in a few weeks there will be a sufficient number of small but solid buildings to protect you against the storms and snow of the winter which is fast coming upon us. Let us go to the forest together and cut the wood today, and tomorrow we will draw that timber to one of the lots you have selected, and you will see with what marvelous speed the house will be raised. But before going to the forest, let us kneel down to ask our Heavenly Father to bless the works of our hands, and grant us to be of one heart, and to protect us against the 2 common accidents of those forests and building works." We all knelt down on the grass, and as much with our tears as with our lips, we sent to the mercy seat a prayer, and we started for the forest. How quickly the first 40 small but neat houses were put up on our beautiful prairies! Whilst the men were cutting timber and raising one another's houses with unity, joy, goodwill, and diligence, the women would prepare the common meals. We obtained our flour and pork from Bourbonius and Moments at a very low price. And as I was a good shot, 1 or 2 friends and I used to kill every day enough prairie chickens, quails, ducks, wild geese, brants, and deer to feed more people than there were in our young colony. When I saw that a sufficient number of houses had been built to give shelter to every one of the first immigrants, I called a meeting and said, "My dear friends, I think that we must now build a 2-story house. The upper part will be used as the schoolhouse for your children on weekdays and for our chapel on Sundays, and the lower part will be my parsonage. I will furnish the money for the flooring, shingles, nails, etc., and you will give me your work gratis to cut and draw the timber and put it up. I will also pay the architect without asking a cent from you. What do you think of this?" They unanimously answered, "Yes. After you have worked so hard to give a home to every one of us, it is just that we should help you to make one for yourself. We are happy to hear that it is your intention to secure a good education for our children. Let us begin the work at once." This was the 16th of January, 1852. The sun was as warm as on a beautiful day of May in Canada. We again fell upon our knees to implore the help of God. The next day we were 72 men in a neighboring forest felling the great oaks. On the 17th of April, only 3 months later, that fine 2-story building, nearly 40 feet square, was blessed by Bishop Vandeveld. It was surmounted by a 30-foot steeple with a bell weighing 250 pounds, whose solemn sound was to tell our joys and sorrows over the boundless prairies. But then we numbered more than 100 families, with more than 500 adults. The chapel, which we thought at first would be too large, was filled to its utmost capacity on the day of its consecration to God. Not a month later, we had to speak of making an addition of 40 feet more, which when finished 6 months later was found to be still insufficient for the accommodation of the constantly increasing flood of immigration which came, not only from Canada, but from Belgium and France. It soon became necessary to make a new center, and expand the limits of my first colony, which I did by planting a cross at L'Arable, about 15 miles southwest of St. Anne, and another at a place we call St. Mary, 12 miles southeast in the country of Iroquois. These settlements were soon filled. For that very spring, more than 1,000 new families came from Canada to join us. No words can express the joy of my heart when I saw how quickly my then dear Church of Rome was taking possession of those magnificent lands, and how soon she would be the unrivaled mistress, not only of the state of Illinois, but of the whole valley of the Mississippi. But the ways of men are not the ways of God. I had been called by the bishops of Rome to Illinois to extend the power of that church. But my God called me there, that I might give to that church the most deadly blow she has ever received on this continent. My task is now to tell my readers how the God of truth and light and life broke, one after another, all the charmed bonds by which I was kept a slave at the feet of the Pope, and how he opened my eyes and those of my people to the unsuspected and untold abominations of Romanism.